I had always been the go-to babysitter in my neighborhood, and when my neighbors called me to look after their two children, a boy aged 9 and a girl aged 6, I gladly accepted. Their house was on the edge of town, a bit isolated but surrounded by picturesque woods. It seemed like the perfect setting for an easy night of babysitting. About an hour into the evening, just as I was getting the kids settled with a movie, there was a knock on the door. It was strangely loud and forceful, making me jump. Feeling a bit weird about how strong the knock was, I didn't open it. Instead, I asked, "Who is it?" A man's voice answered, but he didn't sound very kind. In fact, he sounded a little angry.
"I'm the kids' uncle. Their parents called me to come pick them up."
I looked at the kids to see their reactions. They seemed nervous, and I got the distinct impression they didn't recognize his voice. My unease grew. Why was this man sounding kind of aggressive? With my voice trembling slightly, I said, "The parents didn't inform me about this. They just asked me to watch after the kids." He insisted.
"They just called me. They want me to take them with me. They'll sleep at my place tonight."
Trying to be polite yet cautious, I responded, "I'll call their parents just to make sure." The man's tone shifted to anger. He grabbed the doorknob and tried to open the door.
"What kind of person is my sister hiring to look after her kids?"
He spat, his voice full of menace. I asked him to calm down while I tried to call the parents, but he started threatening me and hurling insults. The kids were so scared they started crying. With my hand shaking, I rushed to dial the parents' number. As soon as I got them on the phone and started explaining the situation, the man must have heard me. He immediately stopped trying to force the door open and left. The mother was extremely scared when I told her what had happened. She said she hadn't asked her brother to pick the kids up, and in fact, her brother didn't even live in the same state. She called the police immediately, and they rushed home. We never found out who that man was, but it left us all very scared and wondering what he wanted with the kids. The parents installed new locks and a security system after that night, and I decided to take a break from babysitting for a while. One evening, while I was babysitting for my cousin, we decided to take her Labrador for a walk and enjoy the sunset. It was a beautiful evening, and the fresh air was invigorating. As we strolled through the neighborhood, I noticed a man following us. He was old, maybe around 70, skinny, and his clothes looked a little dirty. At first, I thought he was just another person out for an evening walk. But as we continued walking through various streets, I realized he was still behind us. It became clear that it was too much of a coincidence for him to be going to his house by following the same random streets we were. Feeling uncomfortable, I decided to stop and see if he would get closer so I could confront him. We paused, and I watched him. He took about 3 steps closer and then stopped, just looking at us. After a few seconds of silence, I shouted, asking if he was okay and whether he was following us. He didn't reply, just stood there, staring. We decided to keep walking, and as we did, the old man started walking again. This time we headed back home, my nerves starting to fray. Once inside, I peeked through the window and saw him standing in front of the house, looking directly at me. I shouted again, telling him that it was really creepy to follow people around. He remained silent and unmoving. I waited for a while to see what he would do, but after about 10 minutes, he still hadn't moved, just kept staring at the house. I decided to call the police, explaining the situation. A few minutes later, I heard the sirens and the police arrived. They spotted the old man right away and started asking him questions, but he still wouldn't say a word. Eventually, they took him with them and left. I have no idea what was wrong with him. Maybe he was sick or confused, but that was one of the creepiest experiences I've ever had. The feeling of being watched and followed so persistently by a stranger is something I won't soon forget. I had just started babysitting for my mom's friend from work, watching 3 energetic boys. It seemed like a typical night: snacks, games, and bedtime stories. The youngest one, just 3 years old, was already asleep, while the 5 and 7-year-olds were still bursting with energy. As the night wore on, the 5-year-old kept insisting there was a monster in his closet. I laughed it off at first, reassuring him that monsters weren't real, but he was persistent, his little face etched with genuine fear. After tucking them into bed and reading a story, I settled on the couch, flipping through a magazine. It was then that I heard it, an unmistakable noise coming from the boys' room. Gathering my courage, I tiptoed back to their room. The older boy was standing by the door, eyes wide with fear. "It's in the closet," he whispered. I listened closely, and sure enough, there were faint, shuffling sounds coming from inside. My mind raced. The boy's mother had mentioned her ex-husband, a man with a history of causing trouble. Could he be here, in the house? The thought was terrifying. I knew I had to act quickly. I gathered the boys, moving them to a safer room down the hall. Locking the door behind us, I called their mother, explaining the situation in hushed tones. She told me to stay put and called the police. We huddled together, the boys clinging to me as we listened for any signs of movement. Eventually, the sounds stopped. When the police arrived, they found the closet empty, but the window in the room was open, and I'm 100% sure it was closed before. It seemed whoever had been there had fled, likely scared off by our discovery. The mother was shaken, but relieved we were safe. She immediately changed the locks and added extra security measures to the house. That night left a lasting impression on me. It wasn't just the fear of a potential intruder, it was the realization of how vulnerable we can be in our own homes. I was babysitting my nieces, Emma and Sophia, one evening while their parents were out. It had been a pleasant night so far. After dinner, the girls went to their rooms to play before bedtime, leaving me some time to tidy up and relax a bit. As the clock ticked closer to bedtime, I decided to check on Sophia first. As I approached her room, I felt a sudden chill in the air. Her bedroom window was wide open, and to my horror, I saw Sophia standing outside with a man. My heart leaped into my throat. I shouted for Sophia to come inside immediately. The man looked up, startled, and without a word, he turned and ran into the darkness. Sophia hesitated for a moment, but then climbed back inside, looking confused and a bit scared. I quickly shut and locked the window, then knelt down to Sophia's level, and asked her what happened and who that man was. Sophia's eyes were wide as she explained that the man had told her he wanted to play and take her to the park. She said he seemed nice, so she decided to go with him. My heart sank at how easily she had been lured outside. I called the police immediately, explaining what had happened. They arrived quickly and took our statements, but despite searching the area, they found no trace of the man. When Emma and Sophia's parents returned, I told them everything. They were horrified and grateful that nothing worse had happened. They comforted Sophia, who was still shaken but unharmed. I was just 15, excited for my first real babysitting job. I was looking after 2 girls, one 10 years old and the other 5. They were great kids, full of energy and imagination. Everything seemed fine, except for one thing. The younger girl had a recurring complaint about hearing tapping on her window at night. Her parents brushed it off, thinking it was just the wind or her overactive imagination, but every night, like clockwork, she would tell me about the tapping. I tried to reassure her, checking the window and finding nothing. One particular night, after putting them to bed, the tapping started again. This time, the little girl was insistent, her voice trembling. I could see how scared she was, and it sent a shiver down my spine. Gathering my courage, I decided to check it out once and for all. I approached the window, heart pounding, and slowly opened it. "Who's there?" I yelled into the darkness. For a moment, there was silence. Then, to my utter shock, a figure bolted from the bushes and ran towards the nearby woods. I quickly closed and locked the window. I called the girl's parents and then the police, explaining what had just happened. The officers arrived swiftly and took my statement. They informed me that there had been several reports of someone tapping on windows in the neighborhood recently. The parents were understandably horrified and grateful I had scared the person away, but I was shaken to my core. That night, I realized the gravity of the situation. It wasn't just a harmless prank, it was something potentially dangerous. Despite their reassurances and offers to increase security, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. I decided to quit the job. My safety and peace of mind were more important than the extra cash.